Good evening, and welcome back to another night in the darker corners of English history, where truth and legend are tangled like thorns on a single white rose. Tonight, I'll take you to the 15th century, to a time when the English crown was not a symbol of peace or divine order, but a prize wrestled from blood-soaked hands, a treasure that drove brothers to betrayal and turned whole families into ghosts. So take a deep breath, dim the lights, and settle in, because the story you are about to hear isn't the romantic ballad of noble knights and chivalric kings you may have been told. It's the story of the House of York, the dynasty of the White Rose, whose claim to England's throne began with a theft, grew in vengeance, and ended in silence. It begins in the year 1399, when England's throne is stolen not by war but by deceit, in a coup so smooth that by the time anyone realized what had happened, the crown was already gone. Henry Bolingbroke, Duke of Lancaster, seized the kingdom from his cousin, King Richard II, locking him away in a cold tower where he conveniently died, perhaps by starvation, perhaps by murder, perhaps by the quiet permission of those who preferred a pliant monarch. England called the new ruler King Henry IV, and for generations pretended this was lawful. But in England, blood remembers. Among those who never forgot was a family, descended from an older, nobler line, the House of York, who believed that by right and by God, the crown had been stolen from them. For 60 years they waited, biding their time beneath the red banners of the Lancasters, who now ruled England. Henry IV spent his reign crushing rebellion. His son, Henry V, fought brilliantly in France, winning the glory of Agincourt, but died young. And his grandson, Henry VI, inherited the crown as an infant and grew into a gentle, pious mankind, charitable, and tragically unfit to rule. He prayed when he should have ruled, forgave when he should have punished, and let the kingdom crumble under his holy hands. By the middle of the 15th century, England was a house-divided nobles at war with each other, law ignored, taxes stolen, trade collapsing, and the crown worn by a man who drifted in and out of madness. Unaware that his throne was slipping away, his queen, Margaret of Anjou, fought to keep the crown for her son with the ferocity of a cornered lioness. But she was French in a nation that had just lost a long and bitter war to France. And she was a woman in a world that distrusted power in female hands. The nobles whispered against her, called her schemer, witch, and whore. Some hated her for her birth, others for her strength. Yet none hated her as fiercely as Richard, Duke of York, a cousin of the king, a man whose bloodline traced directly to Lionel of Antwerp, the second son of King Edward III, a line older and purer than that of Lancaster, which came from the third son, John of Gaunt, by blood, by law, by the very concept of divine right. Richard of York's claim was stronger than the king's. He knew it. Margaret knew it. The whole court knew it, though few dared to say it aloud. Richard of York was not a rebel by nature. He was cautious, methodical, loyal to the idea of order. But in the chaos of Henry's reign, loyalty became a slow form of suicide. The treasury was empty, soldiers unpaid, France lost, and nobles turned bandit in their own shires. The kingdom was a powder keg, and Richard was the spark. When the king collapsed into a year-long silence, unable to speak, eat, or recognize his own wife and child Parliament, named Richard, protector of the realm, for a short time, England had a ruler again, one who restored order, enforced law, and governed with reason. But when Henry awoke from his stupor, Margaret struck back, stripping Richard of his authority and whispering treason into the king's fragile ear. What followed was blood. In the spring of 1455, Richard marched on London at the head of 3,000 men. He claimed he came to free the king from corrupt advisors, but the swords said otherwise. Margaret's army met him at St. Albans, and the streets of that quiet market town became rivers of blood. Nobles hacked each other apart between shop fronts and church doors. The wounded dragged through the mud as townsfolk screamed. When it ended, Henry VI was found in a tanner's shop, bleeding and dazed, an arrow in his neck, the holy crown spattered with common blood. It was the first battle of the Wars of the Roses, short, brutal, and utterly transformative. From that hour, there was no turning back. England had chosen the path of civil war, and the White Rose of York began to bloom in crimson soil. Richard of York believed he could reform the kingdom, restore justice, and heal the realm under lawful rule. But the crown of England was not meant for men who sought peace. It was meant for those willing to drown the world in blood to wear it. Margaret would not yield. Richard would not bend. Their war would burn England for 30 years, kill thousands, destroy families, and leave behind ghosts that still whisper in the stones of old castles. Tonight, we return to where that fire was first lit, to the ambition of one man who thought he could fix a broken kingdom, and to the vengeance of a queen who would burn it to save her son. The white rose would bloom. Yes, but every petal would drip red before it fell. And so begins the story of the House of York, of blood that remembered, of crowns stolen and reclaimed, of kings who rose and kings who fell. This is not the story of heroes and villains, but of mortals who reached for thrones that were never theirs to hold, and found only ruin waiting in the shadows. Now close your eyes, breathe slow, and listen. The War of the Roses has begun. The year is 1455, and the smell of blood still hangs over the narrow streets of St. Albans. The bodies have been cleared, but the stains remain, soaked into the cobblestones, as if the earth itself has chosen to remember King Henry VI, gentle and bewildered, has been led back to London beneath the banners of the White Rose. The Duke of York kneels before him, his armour dented, his sword still slick with the blood of men who once called themselves loyal subjects of the crown, and he swears once more that all he ever wanted was peace. The king, fragile and childlike, accepts his cousin's vow, and England, bleeding from 100 hidden wounds, pretends to believe him. But beneath the quiet, resentment seethes like a fever. The Queen is watching from the shadows, her fury silent, her revenge already taking shape. In the halls of Westminster, Henry's courtiers whisper that the Duke of York has grown too powerful. He is not just a subject anymore, he is a rival. His victory at St. Albans has made him a hero to the people, a saviour to merchants and nobles alike who crave order after years of madness and chaos. Even the commoners speak his name with respect, and that more than armies or titles is the kind of power that can unmake a king. Margaret of Anjou knows this better than anyone. She watches as Parliament names Richard once again protector of the realm, as the seal of royal authority passes into his steady hands, and she bites her tongue until it bleeds. For she understands that her husband's mind may be lost to God, but the kingdom is still hers to defend, and she will not let her child grow up as the son of a deposed king. The years that follow are restless ones. England is like a patient who appears healed, but trembles beneath the surface. In the north, old loyalties fester. The great lords of Lancaster rally their forces in secret, swearing vengeance on the Yorkists who have taken their sons and their honour. Richard of York governs wisely but cautiously, rebuilding the treasury, enforcing the law, and trying to heal a nation that no longer remembers peace. Yet even as he restores order, rumours begin to stir that the king's madness is returning, that the Queen's Council is gathering new allies in France, that the blood spilled at St. Albans has only whetted appetites for more. And then, as if summoned by fate itself, Henry awakens once more from the fog that has bound him. He opens his eyes, asks what year it is, and the entire realm shudders. For the man whose madness gave Richard power now threatens to take it away. The court turns overnight. Richard is dismissed from his protectorate. Margaret surrounds the king with her loyalists, the Duke of Somerset's kin, the Percys of the North, the Nevilles who have chosen red over white. She fills the council chamber with enemies of York, and England becomes a chessboard where every move brings the players closer to ruin. Richard knows what is coming. Accusations of treason, imprisonment, the slow machinery of royal vengeance. So he does what men of his age always did. When words failed, he gathers an army. In the summer of 1459, the two sides meet once more. The Queen's forces outnumber his 3-1, their banners fluttering crimson in the wind. Richard stands upon a low hill, his armour glinting dully in the mist. His sons Edward and Edmund beside him. Young and fierce and eager for battle, they are fighting not for rebellion, but for survival, for the right to live in a kingdom that has already chosen sides. When the arrows fly, they sound like rain on iron, and the fields of England drink deeply again. The wars are no longer whispered, they have become the air itself, thick and metallic with the scent of blood. The years between St. Albans and Wakefield are a tapestry of skirmishes and uneasy truces. Sometimes it seems that peace might return. The Duke of York withdraws to Ireland for a time, ruling there with calm dignity, while Margaret raises her son Edward in exile, teaching him that his birthright has been stolen. Each side writes its own version of justice. Each side believes heaven favours them, and the land in between lies trampled and starved. By the winter of 1460, Parliament grows weary of the war and attempts to force a peace. The Act of Accord is passed, a document meant to end the bloodshed. Henry VI is to remain king for the rest of his life. But upon his death, the crown will pass not to his son but to Richard of York and his heirs. It is a compromise meant to save the realm, but it is also a death sentence written in ink instead of steel. When the news reaches the Queen, something inside her breaks. She has lost her husband's mind, lost her court, and now, by the cold hand of Parliament, she has lost her son's future. She will not endure another humiliation. She rides north in the dead of winter, her banners snapping in the frost, her eyes filled with the fury of every wronged mother in history. Behind her march, thousands northern men hardened by snow and hunger, Scottish allies, mercenaries lured by the promise of plunder. It is not merely an army, it is a storm. Richard of York, confident in his divine right and certain of his cause, marches out from Sandal Castle to meet them. Perhaps he believes the heavens will protect him. Perhaps he believes the Queen would not dare attack so late in the season. But the snow is treacherous, and the world does not favour the righteous. On the 30th day of December, the two forces collide near Wakefield. The white banners of York are swallowed by the red tide of Lancaster. Richard fights bravely, his sons beside him. But the numbers are hopeless. One by one his men fall. His line collapses, and the battlefield becomes a slaughterhouse. Richard himself is either cut down where he stands or captured and executed. No one truly knows. What is known is that his body, once wrapped in the dignity of command, is stripped, mutilated, and beheaded. His head, mockingly crowned with a paper diadem, is displayed on the gates of the city of York, as if to remind the world that even the purest blood will congeal like any other once spilled. The Queen has her victory, but it is a bitter one. The rivers run red with her enemies. Yet England does not kneel, for Richard's bloodline has not ended. His eldest son, Edward, is still alive, a tall and charismatic youth burning with rage. In him, the ambition of the House of York has not died. It has only been refined by loss. When the news of Wakefield reaches him, he does not grieve in silence. He gathers his men, swears vengeance, and prepares to continue the war his father began. And somewhere in the frozen fields of England, beneath the snow that hides the bodies of the fallen, the white rose stirs again, its petals wet with the memory of blood. The storm has only just begun. England has killed its future to defend its past, and the crown glitters above the carnage like a curse. Tonight, as you lie in the dark and let this story settle around you, remember this: every kingdom that forgets mercy ends by devouring its own sons. The Duke of York is dead, but his ghost walks beside us now, whispering that the blood of kings never dries. It only waits, and when it calls again, England will answer. The snow of Wakefield has melted, and with it the last illusion that this war could ever be tamed by reason. The head of Richard, Duke of York, still rots above the city gate, crowned mockingly in paper, staring down upon the streets he once ruled with justice and order. His sons, scattered and burning with vengeance, carry his legacy like a brand across their hearts. Of them all, the eldest, Edward, is the one who matters now. Barely 18, tall as a soldier's pike, with the same fierce eyes that had once steadied his father's court, he rises from grief like a thunderstorm. In him, the white rose of York blooms anew, not pale and gentle, but sharp, violent, and utterly determined. He is done with pleas and parliaments. He is done with compromise. The throne, he swears, will be won, not through law, but through blood. It is the beginning of the year 1461, and England trembles again beneath the drums of war. Edward's army marches through the frozen countryside toward Mortimer's Cross, where the sky itself seems to answer him. At dawn, as the mist lifts, his soldiers cry out in fear, for above them hang 3 suns burning side by side in the cold air. A halo of light refracted through ice. To men who have known only superstition, it is an omen of doom. But Edward, quick-witted and fierce, turns the omen into faith. He rides before his troops, raises his sword, and shouts that the heavens show not curse but blessing, that these 3 suns are the Holy Trinity shining upon their cause. The men believe because they must believe, because without belief there is only fear. And in that moment the young commander transforms dread into devotion. The parhelion becomes his symbol, the sun in splendor, and when they march into battle, they march beneath the sign of divine favor. The Battle of Mortimer's Cross is swift and brutal. Arrows darken the pale winter light, and the clash of steel is so loud it seems to drown the sky. Edward fights at the front, sword flashing, his golden hair flying like a banner. When the day ends, the ground is slick with death, and Lancaster's army lies shattered. Among the slain is Owen Tudor, grandfather to a boy named Henry, who will one day change the course of English history, but that day is far away, and tonight only the Yorkist banners stand tall. Edward claims victory, his first as commander, and in the smoke and snow of Mortimer's Cross, a legend begins to grow, the legend of a king who has not yet been crowned, but fate is not done testing him. Even as Edward celebrates in the west, Queen Margaret gathers her own forces in the north. She has reclaimed her husband, Henry VI, from captivity, and with him marches south, bringing with her a host of hardened soldiers from Scotland and the wild northern shires. Her army is fussed, undisciplined, hungry. It tears through towns and villages like a plague of fire, looting, burning, seizing food and gold. The merchants of London hear what comes and bar the gates, unwilling to welcome a queen whose soldiers carry torches instead of blessings. Margaret, forced to turn back, withdraws north, her victory denied not by swords but by the cold refusal of her own people. Into this power, vacuum rides Edward. He enters London, not as a conqueror, but as a deliverer. Handsome, tall, unscarred by age or failure, the embodiment of what England longs for youth. Strength, certainty. The crowds cheer, throwing flowers before his horse, crying his name in the streets, as if God himself has returned in armour. Within days, he is proclaimed King Edward IV by acclamation of the people and the Lords of Parliament. It is not yet law, not yet sanctified by coronation, but the tide has turned. The red rose wilts, and the white begins to bloom once more. There is no time for ceremony. Edward knows that a crown means nothing if it cannot be defended. The real test awaits him in the fields of Yorkshire, where Margaret's remaining army has taken position near a small village called Towton. It is Palm Sunday, March 29th, 1461, a day meant for prayer and forgiveness. But the sky has chosen war instead. The snow falls thick, driven by a howling wind that blinds and numbs. Two armies stand facing one another across a frozen plain. Perhaps 50,000 men in all the largest battle ever fought on English soil. They wait in the storm, banners snapping in the wind, breath turning to frost. The battle begins with arrows, volleys loosed by the Yorkist archers who have the wind at their backs. The snow carries their shafts farther than any man expects, tearing through the ranks of Lancaster before the enemy can even return fire. When the red banners answer, their arrows fall short, blown back by the storm. Useless, pitiful. It is the first sign that the heavens favour Edward. Then comes the charge, tens of thousands of men running through the snow, screaming, slipping, slamming together like waves crashing against a cliff. The world dissolves into steel and blood. The wind howls through broken helmets. The snow turns red. For 10 hours the slaughter continues. The living fight over the bodies of the dead, slipping in blood and mud. Swinging axes, maces, swords until their arms can no longer lift. Horses trample men into the ground. The wounded crawl away, only to be crushed by the next wave. It is not battle anymore. It is butchery. Chroniclers later write that the rivers ran red that day, that men could cross them on the backs of corpses without getting their feet wet. And no one who survived would ever doubt it. When at last the sun breaks through the storm, it shines on victory. Edward's victory, though won at a cost too high to count. The Lancastrians flee north, their banners trampled into the mud. Margaret, Henry, and their young son Edward escape into Scotland, leaving behind the kingdom in ruin. The field at Towton is silent, but for the crows, tens of thousands lie dead, noble and common alike, their faces frozen in the snow. England has been torn apart, and Edward, 20 years old, stands upon that mountain of bodies and calls himself king. He returns to London in triumph, crowned at Westminster that June, his robes gleaming, his sword carried before him. For the first time in decades, England has a ruler who looks like a king. The people adore him, The court flatters him. The realm bends to his will. Yet behind every cheer lingers the echo of the dead. Towton has broken the nobility, left widows in every county, orphans in every church. The snow has melted. But the rivers still carry whispers of that day, whispers that the blood of Englishmen cannot wash away by victory alone. Edward does not care. He has earned his crown, and in the golden light of his coronation, he believes that the worst is behind him. He believes the war is over. But England has never been kind to those who believe such things. Somewhere in exile, Queen Margaret still dreams of revenge. Somewhere in the shadows of court, a man named Warwick, rich, cunning, loyal for now, watches the young king and smiles the smile of one who knows that power given can also be taken away. For the moment, though, England sleeps. The white rose reigns, its petals bright and pure above the graves of the fallen, and as the wind sighs across the fields of Towton, it seems to whisper a warning, soft but certain. Every crown won in blood must one day be paid for in kind. The young king cannot hear it yet, but history is already sharpening its knives. The spring of 1461 fades into summer, and for a time the kingdom seems to breathe again. Edward IV, young, radiant, and impossibly confident, rules from Westminster with the ease of a man born for the throne. He holds court beneath golden banners, dines beneath ceilings painted with angels, and for the first time in decades, England believes the war is truly over. Merchants open their shops again. Farmers return to their fields. And the people begin to whisper that perhaps God has sent them a king who will heal the wounds left by the madness of Henry VI. But peace in England is like glass beautiful in the sunlight and always waiting to break. Edward governs with charm more than caution. He rewards loyalty lavishly, handing out lands and titles to those who fought for him at Towton, filling his court with men who worship his strength and women who admire his beauty. He is tall, taller than any king England has ever seen, broad-shouldered, golden-haired, and restless. He drinks too much, laughs too loud, fights too easily, and forgives too quickly. He is adored, and that, more than any law or crown, becomes the foundation of his rule. Yet behind the young king's triumph stands another man, older, colder, and infinitely more dangerous, Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick. Known already throughout England as the Kingmaker, Warwick is everything. Edward is not. Calculating, patient, ambitious, the master of strategy both on the field and in the council chamber. It was his armies that secured Edward's victory, his wealth that funded the war, his influence that convinced nobles to join the White Rose cause. And now, Warwick expects to rule beside the king he created. At first, Edward allows it. He is young and eager to learn, and Warwick seems almost like a second father to him. The two men dine together, plan together, and even laugh together. But beneath Warwick's loyalty runs something colder, the belief that Edward's crown rests upon his own shoulders, that without him, the boy would have been nothing but another orphan duke lost to the chaos of war. For several years, this uneasy partnership holds. Warwick governs foreign affairs, negotiates alliances, and keeps the northern lords in check. Edward focuses on restoring trade and repairing the treasury. He is good at it better than anyone expected. The crown's debts shrink. The ports hum with life again, and London begins to glitter with prosperity. Yet as the kingdom begins to recover, the king himself grows restless. He is 22 and has already known the thrill of battle, the roar of victory, and the love of a grateful nation. What he has not yet known is the kind of love that can undo a dynasty. In the spring of 1464, Edward meets Elizabeth Woodville. She is no princess, no foreign noblewoman, not even the daughter of an ancient house, just the widow of a Lancastrian knight. A woman who once fought against him, but she is beautiful in a way that stops the air. Her eyes are calm but unyielding, her face carved with quiet grace, and her words carry a kind of intelligence that disarms the young king. When she kneels before him to beg for the return of her dead husband's lands, Edward sees not a supplicant, but a challenge. He offers her comfort, protection, wealth, all the things a king can give a woman. She refuses. She will be no man's mistress, not even a king's. If he wants her, he must marry her. It is an impossible demand, one that no monarch in his right mind would consider. But Edward is not in his right mind. He is infatuated, perhaps bewitched, or perhaps simply arrogant enough to believe he can have love and power in the same breath. On a May morning, in secret, with only a priest and a handful of witnesses, Edward marries Elizabeth Woodville in her family's manor at Grafton. No ambassadors are informed, nor council consulted. Not even Warwick, who at that very moment is arranging a grand marriage alliance with the daughter of the King of France. When Warwick returns to England, triumphant with news of peace and alliance, he finds his king already married not to a princess, but to a widow from Northamptonshire. The betrayal is absolute. Warwick's pride turns to fury. Years of work, years of diplomacy, years of power undone by a single, impulsive act of lust disguised as love. The kingmaker who made a king has been made a fool. Yet the true disaster is only beginning, for Elizabeth does not come to court alone. She brings with her a vast and ambitious family, the Woodvilles, a swarm of brothers, sisters, cousins, all hungry for power. Within months, her relatives begin to rise. Her father becomes Earl Rivers. Her brothers are granted titles and lands. Her sisters are married into the richest noble families in England, displacing the alliances Warwick once built. The court of Edward IV, once bound by loyalty to the men who had fought for him, becomes a battlefield of whispers and jealousies. The nobility is outraged. How dare the king raise up commoners? They murmur. How dare the widow's family climb above those who shed blood at Towton? Yet Edward refuses to listen. He adores his queen. He admires her intelligence, her calm counsel, her ability to soothe him when rage and arrogance threaten to spill over. He gives her everything. And through her, the Woodvilles become a dynasty. Within the dynasty, their fingers creeping into every corner of royal power. Warwick, who once commanded the realm, finds himself ignored, his advice dismissed, his influence fading. He hides his anger behind a mask of courtesy, but his silence grows heavier by the day. The court begins to divide. The old nobility, resentful and proud, gathers around the kingmaker. The new favourites, brash and greedy, cling to the queen. Edward, drunk on his own confidence, believes he can balance them both. He cannot. By 1469, the tension explodes. Warwick, desperate to regain his power, finds an ally in Edward's younger brother, George, Duke of Clarence, a tall, handsome man poisoned by jealousy and ambition. Together, they whisper that Edward has fallen under the spell of a witch, that the Queen and her family are corrupting the crown. They gather an army in the north and claim they march not against the king, but against his evil counsellors. It is a familiar lie, the same one Richard of York once told, before the blood of St. Azely-Alain. Albans, and England, foolishly, believes it again. Edward rides to meet them. I confident that Warwick will not dare raise a sword against his own creation. But he is wrong. At Edgecote Moor, his forces are crushed. His father-in-law, Earl Rivers, is captured and beheaded. His brother John Woodville is executed beside him. Edward himself is taken prisoner, paraded through the countryside like a trophy. For a brief, humiliating moment, the Kingmaker rules England again, holding the king in custody, issuing decrees in his name. But even Warwick cannot control what he has unleashed. The nobles refuse to obey a man who holds the king hostage. The people grow restless, and the kingdom begins to slide once more toward anarchy. Within weeks, Warwick is forced to release his captive. Edward returns to London, smiling, forgiving, pretending to forget. But inside, his rage hardens to iron. He knows now that Warwick can never be trusted again, and that blood, not forgiveness, will decide England's future. The throne he thought he had secured through courage and charm now wobbles beneath him, threatened not by foreign enemies but by the very man who helped him seize it. The House of York has won the war but lost its peace, and the seeds of its own destruction are already growing in the cracks of its triumph. In the golden halls of Westminster, beneath painted angels and polished floors, Edward IV sits beside his beautiful queen and smiles the smile of a man who believes himself invincible. But far to the north, in the castles that once bowed to him, the Kingmaker is gathering men again, sharpening swords, and whispering to the wind that kings made by mortal hands can be unmade the same way. The sun in splendor still shines, but the clouds are moving in. The rose is still white, but its petals are trembling, ready to fall. The year is 1470, and England holds its breath once again. The peace Edward IV promised has rotted from within, eaten alive by the same ambition and betrayal that had once drowned the realm in blood. Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, the man who made a king, now dreams of unmaking one. His pride, once gilded with triumph, has curdled into rage. He has been humiliated by the Woodvilles, cast aside like a servant by the very monarch he crowned. And in the echoing halls of Middleham Castle, where banners of the White Bear once fluttered proudly, Warwick plots revenge. But vengeance alone is never enough to raise an army, and so he begins to weave alliances out of old hatred and shared envy, spinning a web that stretches from the dark valleys of Yorkshire to the glittering courts of France. Edward IV, still dazzling in his youth, believes himself untouchable. His charm, his victories, his beauty, they have always been his weapons, and they have never failed him. The Queen stands beside him, serene and calculating, her family woven through every corner of royal power. The Woodvilles' ascent is complete, their influence smothering like ivy. Elizabeth's father, before his execution, had been made Earl Rivers. Her brothers now command armies, oversee treasuries, and sit in Parliament as though they had been born to nobility. Edward adores them all, blind to the resentment boiling around him. His younger brother George, Duke of Clarence, watches from the sidelines, his pride festering, his ambition swelling until it blots out reason. George believes he was meant for more than the gilded shadow his brother allows him to occupy. And Warwick, master manipulator, sees in that envy a weapon sharper than any sword. When Warwick invites George north to Middleham, he cloaks his intentions in honeyed words. He speaks of destiny, of justice, of the divine right of bloodlines. He reminds George that he, too, carries the blood of York, and that Edward's marriage illegitimate, impulsive, unblessed by diplomacy, has weakened the crown's sanctity. A king must marry for England, Warwick tells him, not for lust. He promises George a match worthy of royalty, his own daughter, Isabelle Neville, young, noble, and wealthy, whose blood ties to both York and Lancaster could unite the realm under George's rule. It is a dangerous promise. But George, easily flattered and hungrier for power than for caution, listens. In July of 1469, they are wed in defiance of Edward's will, with the blessing of none other than Louis XI, King of France, who is all too happy to watch England tear itself apart again. The rebellion begins almost at once. Warwick and Clarence issue proclamations accusing Edward of corruption, of misrule, of allowing the Woodvilles to devour the kingdom. They claim to act in the king's name, to rescue him from the serpents in his court. And once again, the realm believes. Armies gather in the north, banners rise like ghosts, and when Edward marches out to confront them, he discovers too late that this is not a revolt he can charm or bribe away. The two forces meet at Edgecote Moor, where the fields run with rain and blood. Edward's troops are overwhelmed, his commanders executed, and the young king himself captured and dragged in chains through Warwick's lands. No longer the sun in splendour, but a prisoner in the house of his own creation. For a few brief weeks, Warwick rules in his place, issuing decrees, restoring his allies, and exiling the Woodvilles. Yet power without legitimacy is a crown made of smoke. The nobles refuse to obey a man who holds the king hostage. The people mutter that England has no monarch, and lawlessness spreads like a fever. Towns riot, trade falters, and within months, the so-called saviour of the realm has become its jailer. Warwick, realising that the kingdom is slipping from his fingers, releases Edward under the guise of reconciliation. The king, smiling as ever, forgives him publicly, praise him as or loyal cousin, and pretends to forget. But inside him, something cold has hardened. Edward has learned the same lesson. Every ruler of his age must learn mercy is weakness, and forgiveness is only the mask worn by revenge. By the spring of 1470, Warwick and Clarence rise again. This time openly. This time prepared to destroy what they once built. But Edward moves faster. His spies, his brothers, even the Queen's kin feed him the whispers of their plots. He crushes their forces at Empingham, hunts them through England, and drives them from the land they once ruled. Warwick flees across the sea to Calais, seeking shelter in the fortress he commands, but even there, his banner no longer protects him. The garrison refuses him entry, loyal still to Edward. So the kingmaker, stripped of title, land, and power, sails into exile, the wind whipping through his thinning hair as the coast of England fades behind him. He is a man who has played God and lost, and only one path remains, the path of the desperate. In France, fate performs its strangest trick yet. The kingmaker meets the queen of the enemy, Margaret of Anjou, widow of the mad Henry VI. Exiled these long years with her son Edward of Westminster, has grown harder but not broken. Her eyes are colder, her voice lower, her pride undimmed. When Warwick kneels before her, the gesture stuns Europe. Here is the man who once hunted her through England, who dethroned her husband and slaughtered her allies, now humbling himself at her feet. But hatred and politics have never been strangers. Warwick offers her everything. She lost her throne, her name, her son's future, in exchange for her trust. She should spit in his face. Instead, she offers her hand. Their alliance is sealed in the most shocking of bargains. Her son Edward will marry Warwick's younger daughter, Anna Neville, binding Lancaster and the Kingmaker by blood. The news spreads through Europe like wildfire. The Queen and the traitor have joined forces. France sends ships and gold. Exiled Lancastrians rally once more. Warwick sails home with an army, landing in the autumn of 1470, his banners snapping defiantly in the wind. His allies rise in the north, and within weeks, England is on fire again. Edward, caught by surprise, scrambles to gather his forces. Bled. Betrayal cuts deep. The Duke of Clarence, ever faithless, turns on him once more, raising his men in the Kingmaker's name. The tide shifts. Edward, who once thought himself unassailable, flees England with a handful of loyal men, his youngest brother, Richard of Gloucester, beside him. They cross the Channel to the court of Duke Charles of Burgundy, husband to Edward's sister Margaret, arriving penniless, crownless, and hunted. Back in London, the gates open to Warwick. He marches into the capital without resistance, enters the Tower of London, and orders the release of the long-imprisoned Henry VI Pale. Bewildered, fragile, after 9 years in captivity, the gentle king is led through cheering crowds, as if resurrected from the dead. Parliament declares Edward's reign void, restores the old order, and names Warwick Protector of the Realm. It is called the Redemption, a word that means restoration. But the truth is something darker. England has no king. It has only ghosts. Henry's mind is gone, and Warwick rules in his name. But peace is an illusion built on borrowed time. Edward IV is not finished. Through the winter of 1471, he gathers strength in Burgundy. Duke Charles is cautious, wary of war with France, but family ties prove stronger than fear. He lends Edward ships, soldiers, and coin just enough to give the exiled king a fighting chance. In March, Edward lands in Yorkshire with barely 1,000 men, claiming he has come only to reclaim his duchy. Not his crown. It is a lie, but a clever one. The northern towns, weary of endless war, let him pass. Men begin to flock to him, old veterans of Towton, nobles tired of Warwick's rule, loyalists who remember the golden promise of the sun in splendour. His army swells. By the time he reaches Coventry, he commands 7,000 men. And then, as if the gods themselves enjoy mockery, Clarence appears once more, bringing 4,000 soldiers with him. Everyone expects a battle brother against brother, York against York. But instead, Clarence rides alone to Edward's camp, kneels before his brother, and begs forgiveness. Perhaps he senses that Warwick's luck has run out. Perhaps he simply knows how to survive. Edward, pragmatic as ever, embraces him. Together, they march on London. The city, fickle as the wind, opens its gates again. The people remember Edward's charm, his beauty, his promise of peace. They remember that under him, England had prospered. They forget the taxes, the wars, the Woodville's greed. They only remember the glow of the sun that once shone on them. Henry VI, dragged once more from the tower, is returned to his cell. Edward dons his armour, mounts his horse, and rides north to find the man who stole his crown. They meet near the village of Barnet on Easter Sunday, 1471, beneath a sky choked with fog so thick that men can barely see 10 feet ahead. It is chaos before it begins. Archers loose blindly, cannon fire echoes across the mist, and men stumble into death without seeing who they strike. Warwick commands the larger army, but fortune is cruel. His troops mistake their own allies for enemies in the smoke and slaughter. Shouting treason, until the confusion devours them. Edward, fearless and furious, charges through the fog with his brother Richard beside him, cutting down anyone in his path. When the battle finally clears, the Kingmaker lies dead on the field, trampled and bloodied, his armor stripped, his face unrecognizable. The man who made kings dies unmade, his body left for crows and rain. Edward rides to London a victor once more. Yet there is no celebration waiting, only another storm. Queen Margaret has landed on English soil with her son, Edward of Westminster, and a fresh army, determined to avenge her husband's imprisonment and the deaths of her allies. The two forces meet at Tewkesbury in May. Edward's troops, seasoned and disciplined, shatter her army in a single day. The young prince is captured, defiant even in defeat, and brought before the king. Words are exchanged, proud, reckless words, and moments later, the boy is dead, stabbed by Edward's men. The queen is taken prisoner. Henry is murdered in the Tower soon after. And with that, the line of Lancaster ends. England falls silent at last. The war that began with the ambitions of Richard of York has ended with the triumph of his son, but the peace that follows is heavy and uneasy. For Edward's victory has come at the cost of every bond that once held his family together. The Woodvilles reign beside him, the nobles obey in fear, and his brothers watch from the shadows, one loyal, one treacherous, both waiting for the next turn of fate. The crown, now secure, gleams bright but cold, and beneath it Edward IV sits not as the radiant boy who once rode into London to the cheers of his people, but as a man who has seen how quickly loyalty can sour and love can betray. The Kingmaker is gone, his body buried at Bisham Abbey, but his curse lingers, whispering through the corridors of power that no king made by mortal hands will ever die in peace. And so the white rose blooms again, its petals edged with crimson, its scent the faint echo of steel and sorrow. Edward holds his throne, but England itself is weary, and the ghosts of the fallen still crowd the edges of his triumph. The sun in splendor shines on, but it is no longer a promise. It is a warning. The year is 1471, and England lies quiet at last. Or so it seems. The wars are over, the red rose trampled, the white triumphant. King Edward IV has reclaimed his throne. His enemies are dead or scattered, and the name of York rules from Westminster to the northern hills. The fires of battle have burned themselves to ash, and yet, beneath the calm surface of victory, the embers of distrust and envy still glow, waiting for the wind that will make them burn again. For though Edward now sits secure in his golden halls, he rules a kingdom haunted by the ghosts of those he destroyed. Warwick, the Kingmaker, who died face down in the mud at Barnet, the gentle Henry VI strangled in his Tower cell, and the boy Edward of Westminster whose blood soaked the stones of Tewkesbury. The price of peace has been death, and peace bought with blood never lasts. Edward returns to London that summer crowned once more, his queen restored beside him, her beauty and serenity unbroken by exile or fear. The court glitters again with jewels and music, but the air is different now, heavier, colder, sharpened by memory. The Woodvilles, risen higher than ever, fill the court like a tide. Their brothers and sons occupy every office of power, their sisters married into every noble family worth knowing. The Queen's father and brother are dead, but her kin have multiplied in influence, and even the proudest barons bow before them. Edward allows it. He is grateful to his wife, grateful for her loyalty, and too weary of war to question her family's ambition. Yet among those who watch from the edge of this gilded court, one face never smiles that of his brother George, Duke of Clarence. George has been forgiven for treason, pardoned for rebellion, and restored to his estates. Yet forgiveness has done nothing to calm the storm in his heart. He is a man consumed by what-ifs, forever measuring himself against his brother's shadow. He cannot forget the years when he was Warwick's golden ally, nor can he forgive himself for the weakness that brought him crawling back to Edward. He hates the Woodvilles, whose wealth and arrogance remind him daily that he, a prince of the blood, is still made to bow before those born as lesser men. He hates the Queen, who looks through him as though he were air. And most of all, he hates Edward's laughter, that deep, careless laughter of a man who seems immune to consequence, who wins even when he should fall. In the early years of Edward's restored reign, George hides his bitterness behind a smile, drinking too much, gambling too often, pretending at loyalty. But envy is a seed that never dies. It only waits. In 1476, fate gives him an excuse to let it bloom. His wife, Isabel Neville, daughter of the dead kingmaker, dies soon after childbirth. The infant perishes as well, and George's grief curdles into suspicion. He convinces himself that his enemies, the Woodvilles, have poisoned her, that their witchcraft has stolen his happiness, as surely as it stole his place beside the throne. He begins to mutter about sorcery, about conspiracies whispered through the corridors of the palace. In the taverns of London, servants claim they've heard him curse the Queen by name. Edward, patient to a fault where his family is concerned, tries to reason with him. He sends gifts, kind words, and warnings, but George cannot be soothed. The man who once betrayed his brother for Warwick's cause begins to unravel in full view of the court. He accuses one of Isabel's ladies-in-waiting, Anchoret Twiniho, of witchcraft and murder. Without trial, without royal permission, he has her dragged before a local jury, condemned, and hanged. It is an act of madness, a prince usurping the law of his own king. When Edward learns of it, his fury is cold and absolute. For all his indulgence, he cannot allow his brother to behave like a law unto himself. Summoned before the king, George faces a council chamber packed with nobles. Edward sits upon the throne, silent, his eyes hard. When George begins to defend himself, insisting that he acted in the name of justice, Edward cuts him off with a voice that chills every man in the room. Justice, he says, belongs to the crown, not to jealous men seeking vengeance for imaginary crimes. The court falls silent. The two brothers stare at each other across the gulf of their shared blood, one a king, the other a man undone by his own rage. After that day, George's downfall is inevitable. He begins spreading darker rumours that Edward himself is not legitimate, that their mother, the Duchess Cecily, was unfaithful, that the true king should be the next son born in wedlock, meaning George. The whispers spread through London like smoke, and though few believe them, they are enough. For a medieval monarch, legitimacy is everything, the thread from which all power hangs. To question it is treason in its purest form. In June of 1477, Edward has George arrested and confined in the Tower of London. The once proud Duke rages and pleads in equal measure, sending desperate letters to nobles and clerics. But none will stand for him now. Parliament is called in January of 1478 to hear the charges. Edward himself, too wounded to delegate, presents the case against his own brother. He does not shout. He does not cry. He lists the betrayals, the conspiracies with Warwick, the rebellion, the false accusations of sorcery, the rumours of bastardy. The hall listens in stunned silence. When he finishes, George's fate is sealed. The vote for death is nearly unanimous. But sentencing a man and killing a brother are two different things. Edward hesitates for weeks, torn between love and justice, memory and duty. He walks the corridors of Westminster in silence, his face grey with conflict. Some say the Queen, tired of George's poison, urges Edward to act. Others say Richard, the youngest brother, pleads for mercy. In the end, it changes nothing. On the 18th of February, 1478, George, Duke of Clarence, is executed in the Tower. No spectators are allowed. No records survive of the method. But legend, delicious and cruel, insists that George met his end, not by sword or axe, but drowned in a butt of Malmsey wine, his favourite indulgence. His vice made into his grave. Whether the story is true or not hardly matters. It is believed, and belief has its own power. The tale spreads like wildfire through England, growing with every retelling that the king's brother was drowned in drink, that the laughter of his ghost echoes through the stone halls of the Tower, that his sins were washed away in the wine he loved more than life. Edward never speaks of it again. When asked, he only says that justice was done, and his eyes cloud with something that looks too much like grief to be denial. Those who see him in the months that follow say the king begins to age all at once. His golden hair dulled, his body grown heavy, his laughter forced. Perhaps the weight of a brother's blood sits heavier than a crown. For a while, it seems as though Edward's fortunes might recover. The kingdom remains stable. Trade prospers, and the Queen gives birth to more children, securing the dynasty he fought so hard to build. But the king who once rode like a god through the smoke of battle now moves slower, speaks softer, tires more easily. He has begun to live like a man who no longer trusts his own heart. The joy that once defined him is gone, replaced by indulgence. His nights are filled with banquets and wine, his days with the dull business of governance he once loved. Behind the grandeur of his court, the whispers grow that the king's health is failing. Too much food, too much drink, too many sleepless nights spent wandering his chambers as though searching for ghosts. By 1483, those whispers become prophecy. Edward falls ill suddenly in early spring. The chroniclers speak of fever, of a chill caught on the Thames, of exhaustion and the consequences of pleasure. Others whisper darker theories: poison, divine punishment, the vengeance of the brother he drowned. The truth is lost to time, but the result is certain. On the 9th of April, King Edward IV, once the Golden Conqueror, dies in his bed at the age of 40. His eldest son, Edward, is 12 years old, a boy with his father's beauty, but none of his experience. The court dissolves into chaos. The Woodvilles move swiftly, trying to seize custody of the new king before anyone else can. The Queen retreats into her family's network of power, summoning her brother Anthony, Earl Rivers, who guards the boy at Ludlow Castle. Meanwhile, far to the north, the late king's younger brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, receives the news. He is loyal, capable, and feared, a man who has spent his life in the shadow of his elder brothers. Watching, waiting, learning, Edward had trusted him above all others, naming him Lord Protector in his will. Now, that title becomes the most dangerous one in England. The story that will follow the story of the princes in the Tower, of the Protector who becomes a king, of the dynasty that devours itself from within, begins in this moment. In the silence after Edward's death, for the crown that once seemed so radiant now passes to a child. And England has seen what happens when children wear crowns. The last time it ended in madness, in blood, in a war that nearly destroyed the kingdom. And this time, though no one knows it yet, it will end in something darker. Still, not madness. Not war. But disappearance. The peace Edward IV built with steel and charm will crumble like sand. And the white rose that once blazed across England's banners will begin to fade. So the years of the Golden King end not with thunder, but with a whisper. The whisper of wine poured into a cup. The whisper of prayers for a dying man. The whisper of a crown too heavy for the next head that must bear it. The king who drowned his brother in legend now lies still. His laughter gone from the halls of Westminster. His legacy resting in the fragile hands of a boy. The wars of the roses are not over. They are merely waiting, patient as ghosts, for the next act to begin. The spring of 1483 begins with morning bells, slow and hollow, echoing across the grey sky of London. King Edward IV is dead, and the realm that once glittered under his sun now lies cloaked in uncertainty. His funeral is grand, a spectacle of velvet and gold. But beneath the hymns and candles, fear walks silently through the aisles. England remembers too well what happens when the throne belongs to a child. The last boy king, Henry VI, had watched his crown dragged through decades of madness and war. No one wants to see it happen again. Yet here they are, with a 12-year-old heir and a court full of wolves. Young Edward, now proclaimed Edward V, waits in Ludlow Castle under the guardianship of his uncle by marriage, Anthony Woodville, Earl Rivers. The boy is clever, handsome, and solemn beyond his years, already aware that every smile around him hides a blade. In London, his mother, the widowed Queen Elizabeth, grieves behind closed doors, but wastes no time securing her family's power. She knows the throne her son inherits is fragile, that the Woodvilles' survival depends on how quickly they can seize control of the regency. She sends messengers racing to her brother, ordering him to bring the new king to the capital at once. He obeys, unaware that another uncle, one far more dangerous, is already riding south to intercept them. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, the youngest of the late king's brothers, has lived his life in discipline and shadow, quiet where Edward was dazzling, loyal where George was reckless. He has spent years ruling the turbulent north with a firm but fair hand. To those who know him, he is a man of honour, cautious and capable, the last true Yorkist who still remembers what the crown cost their family. To others, he is simply ambitious, another prince whose loyalty may bend when the scent of power grows strong. Edward IV's dying wish, named Richard Lord Protector, until his son comes of age. It should have been a position of trust. Instead, it becomes a throne waiting to be taken. The two parties meet at Stony Stratford, a quiet market town halfway to London. At the end of April, Earl Rivers rides proudly beside the young king, his escort gleaming in Woodville livery. Richard arrives with a smaller force, but greater purpose. The meeting begins with smiles and ceremony, with bows and embraces and words of family unity. But before dawn, the tone shifts. Richard enters the king's chamber with soldiers at his back. Rivers, along with Elizabeth's son from her first marriage, Thomas Grey, are arrested on charges of treason. Their men are disarmed, their banners torn down. Richard bows before his nephew and swears loyalty, telling the boy that he must protect him from the bad counsel of those who would exploit him. Edward, frightened but trusting, believes his uncle's words. He does not yet understand that the cage is gilded. The journey to London resumes, but it is no longer a royal procession. It is an escort under guard. When they reach the capital in early May, Richard is hailed as protector by the council and granted full authority over the young king's household. Edward is placed in the royal apartments of the Tower of London, supposedly to prepare for his coronation, and the city breathes a cautious sigh of relief. This is tradition. They tell themselves, the Tower is not a prison, it is the ancient residence of kings before coronation. Still, unease hums beneath the calm. The Queen, realizing what has happened, flees into sanctuary at Westminster Abbey with her remaining children. She brings her daughters, her servants, and her youngest son, 9-year-old Richard, Duke of York, and barricades herself behind the church's sacred walls. Sanctuary is her only shield, for within those stones, even a king cannot reach her. Richard moves swiftly to consolidate control. He calls meetings of the council, dismisses the Woodville officials from their posts, and replaces them with men of his own loyalty lords from the north who owe him everything. He orders the execution of Earl Rivers and Thomas Grey, declaring their deaths necessary for the peace of the realm. The council murmurs, but obeys. Many remember the chaos that followed Henry VI's collapse. They would rather serve a strong protector than endure another decade of anarchy. To the public, Richard plays the role of the reluctant guardian. Humble and devout, he attend mass daily, speaks softly of duty and loyalty, and insists that his only wish is to see his brother's son crowned in safety. But behind the solemn words, the machinery of ambition grinds quietly onward. As weeks turn to June, the coronation approaches, and then, unexpectedly, is delayed. The reasons seem minor at first: adjustments to ceremony, matters of precedence, questions about titles. But in whispers, a new rumor begins to circulate, strange and dangerous. It claims that Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid, that before marrying her, the late king had already been contracted to another woman, Lady Eleanor Butler. In the eyes of canon law, such a pre-contract would make all of Edward's children illegitimate. The source of this revelation is said to be Robert Stillington, Bishop of Bath and Wells, a quiet man whose memory suddenly becomes very convenient for the Duke of Gloucester. The council debates, priests are consulted, and though no proof is produced that can stand the test of reason, the tale grows like ivy until it smothers every doubt. On the 22nd of June, a sermon is preached at St. T's, Paul's Cross, by a priest named Ralph Shah. His voice rings across the square as he proclaims that young Edward and his siblings are bastards, born of an unlawful union, and therefore unfit to inherit the crown. He declares that the rightful heir to the throne, the only legitimate son of the House of York, is Richard himself. The crowd listens in stunned silence. Some cheer. Others cross themselves in horror, but the momentum cannot be stopped. Within days, an assembly of lords and commons, pressed and persuaded by the Protector's allies, declares the claim valid. On the 25th of June, they petition Richard to take the throne. He refuses, at least. Publicly, he protests that he loves his nephew, that he never sought a crown, that he would accept only if it were God's will and England's need. They press him again, and again he declines. The third time, after sufficient theatre, he bows his head in feigned humility and accepts. The document that justifies it all, Titulus Regius, is drafted immediately, recording the illegitimacy of Edward's children and the righteousness of Richard's claim, and so, on the 6th of July, 1483, Richard of Gloucester is crowned King Richard III in Westminster Abbey. The boy who was Edward V, king for 77 days, but never crowned, remains in the Tower. His younger brother, the 9-year-old Duke of York, is brought from sanctuary shortly after, coaxed by promises of safety and reunion. The Queen, cornered and powerless, agrees to release him, after receiving solemn oaths from Richard's men that no harm will come to her children, the boy joins his brother in the tower, and for a short while they are seen at play in the gardens, waving from the windows, laughing as boys, their age should. Then the sightings grow fewer. By late summer, they are gone from view altogether. London begins to whisper. Some say they have been moved for safety, others that they have fallen ill. Servants swear they heard weeping in the night, that guards were replaced suddenly, that the tower's doors were sealed. The rumours grow darker that the new king has silenced the boys forever, smothered them as they slept, and buried them beneath the stone stairs. Richard issues no statement. He does not show the princes alive, nor does he admit them dead. He simply acts as though they never existed. It is this silence, more than any sword or order, that damns him. Across the country, people begin to turn against him. The crown sits heavy on his head, and his legitimacy won through cunning is poisoned by doubt. The white rose, once the symbol of rightful rule, now blooms black in the minds of those who mourn the vanished children. Even some of Richard's closest allies begin to question him in secret. His reign, barely begun, is already shadowed by tragedy. In the north, where loyalty to Richard runs deepest, men still defend him. They insist the rumours are lies spread by bitter Woodvilles, that the princes are hidden abroad, safe from plots. But in London, where gossip grows faster than truth, the story of the murdered boys spreads like wildfire. Mothers whisper it to their children as warning. Preachers weave it into sermons, and though the evidence is uncertain, the guilt hardens into fact. The tower, once the fortress of kings, has become a tomb. For Queen Elizabeth, still in sanctuary, grief turns to a hollow kind of numbness. Her daughters grow up behind church walls, pale and silent. Knowing their brothers are gone, she does not dare accuse the king aloud. She has learned what happens to those who challenge the crown, but her prayers grow sharper, her gaze colder. She knows that one day, someone will avenge her sons, though she may not live to see it. And so the summer of 1483 ends in silence. Two princes vanish. A usurper is crowned, the House of York. Once the bright flower of England's hope has devoured its own, Richard rides north to secure his throne, leaving London restless and afraid. The bells that rang for coronation now toll for ghosts. And though the wars have ended, the kingdom understands, in some deep and wordless way, that peace has never truly returned. The crown of England, it seems, cannot rest upon an innocent head for long. It always finds its way back to blood. The autumn winds of 1483 carry the chill of rumour through every market and hall of England. The two young princes are gone, their laughter erased from the corridors of the tower. And though no one dares speak it openly, everyone knows what it means. The new king, Richard III, rides north with banners flying and priests blessing his name. But behind him trails the stench of doubt that even incense cannot hide. He claims the crown was his by law, that his brother's sons were illegitimate, that he has brought stability after years of deceit and greed. Yet in the quiet hours, as candles gutter low and servants whisper behind their hands, England repeats the same question like a prayer turned curse. What has he done with the boys? Richard does not answer. He fills his days with duty, reform, and the careful crafting of authority. His rule, on paper, is just: he lowers taxes, expands legal rights for commoners, and introduces new systems to curb corruption. He rides the northern roads himself to ensure order, visiting towns that no king has seen in decades. In council, he speaks softly, with reason, with the measured tone of a man who believes he can shape his own legend through fairness. But every act of justice seems shadowed by an unseen hand. When he passes through villages, mothers clutch their children tighter. And when his name is proclaimed in church, the congregation bows but does not meet the priest's eyes. Even those who admire him cannot escape the unease that follows his steps like a spectre. At Middleham Castle, where he once ruled as Duke of Gloucester, Richard finds fleeting comfort in the company of his wife, Anne Neville, and their son, Edward of Middleham. The boy is the heart of his father's ambition, the proof that his reign is more than conquest, more than whispers. He is the future, the living continuation of the White Rose. But in the spring of 1484, fate steals even that fragile solace. The child falls ill, the fever rising like a curse sent by the dead. Richard prays in the chapel for hours, kneeling until his knees bleed, promising God his soul in exchange for his son's breath. It is no use. Edward of Middleham dies before Easter, not yet 11 years old, and the king who murdered innocents to secure his crown finds himself alone in the same silence he created. Queen Anne withers under the weight of grief. Once delicate but strong-willed, she becomes pale as the frost and frail as the smoke from a dying fire. Some say she blames herself. Others whisper that Richard's ambition has poisoned their marriage as surely as any venom. There are darker murmurs still, that he plans to marry his own niece, Elizabeth of York, the eldest surviving daughter of Edward IV, to unite their claims and legitimize his reign. The notion is scandalous, monstrous even. But England is a land that thrives on rumour. Every silence breeds 10 new lies. By the winter of 1485, Anne is dead, her body wasted, her soul worn thin by loss. The king buries her with solemn pomp, but those who watch him at the funeral swear his eyes are dry. The priest chants the rites of mercy, and outside, snow begins to fall, covering her coffin as though heaven itself would hide the evidence of sorrow. Now Richard is truly alone. His court is loyal in name, but loyalty is fragile when built upon fear. Even his staunchest allies in the north whisper doubts, their faith eroded by grief, superstition, and the scent of rot that clings to every unburied truth. Far across the Channel, in the courts of Brittany and France, a new whisper rises, a name, half forgotten, a lineage thought extinct. Henry Tudor, the exiled heir of a long-vanished claim, a man of frail health and uncertain blood, begins to gather men beneath a banner. No one has seen in 20 years the Red Dragon of Wales, the symbol of the Lancastrian line. His claim is tenuous, his army small, his legitimacy laughable. But in a kingdom poisoned by guilt, even the ghost of a rightful cause can become a rallying cry. England begins to imagine redemption in the face of a stranger. Richard knows of him. Of course, he calls him the bastard exile, mocks his pretensions, dismisses his threat. But deep down, he feels the tremor of destiny shifting. Henry's mother, Margaret Beaufort, moves like a shadow within England itself, weaving alliances through secret marriages and holy vows. She is the widow of Lord Stanley, whose influence stretches across the realm. She promises her son's hand in marriage to Elizabeth of York, the very niece Richard is rumoured to desire for himself. The plan is simple but brilliant, a union that would merge the red rose and the white, end the wars through blood, and wash away the sins of both sides beneath the symbol of peace. But peace built on promises is no sturdier than one built on lies. In the spring of 1485, Richard's rule begins to crack. Rebellions flare like sparks in the north and south, some crushed swiftly, others allowed to fester. His enemies do not yet gather openly, but their loyalty has curdled. Men who once fought beside him now watch, waiting to see which way the wind will blow. Richard rides across England again, restless, never sleeping long, convinced that God has abandoned him as completely as his family has. The court whispers that he is haunted, that he sees the ghosts of his nephews at night, pale and silent, standing by the foot of his bed. The priests call it penance, but the king calls it exhaustion. Then comes the summer that will end him. In early August, Henry Tudor lands on the coast of Wales with a small force of French soldiers and a host of Welshmen drawn by old loyalties. He carries no great banner of conquest, only a quiet certainty that the crown of England has grown cursed enough to fall into his hands. He marches inland, gathering men with each step, and by the time he reaches the Midlands, his army, though smaller than Richard's, is strong enough to face him. The king, encamped at Nottingham, rallies his own forces, his standard raised high, his white boar glimmering silver against the sky. It is said he looks calm that night, almost serene, as though he already knows this will be his final campaign. At dawn on the 22nd of August, the armies meet on the fields near Market Bosworth. The air is heavy, the ground slick with dew. Richard commands perhaps 12,000 men, Henry half that number. But among those who stand beneath the king's banner are men whose hearts no longer belong to him, the Stanleys, whose loyalty he distrusts but cannot do without, linger at the edges of the field with thousands of soldiers, watching, waiting. Their leader, Lord Thomas Stanley, is Henry's stepfather. Their allegiance is the sword hanging above Richard's head. The battle begins with cannon fire and confusion. Henry's troops advance carefully, disciplined, their French mercenaries steady as stone. Richard's archers answer, the sound like thunder rolling across the valley. Swords meet shields. Men fall into the mud, and the morning sun rises over a tide of blood. Richard, ever the warrior, fights in the thick of it, his armor gleaming, his crown bound to his helmet. For a moment, victory seems possible. Then he sees, across the chaos, Henry Tudor, riding with only a small guard, vulnerable, untested, within reach of destiny. Without hesitation, Richard spurs his horse and charges straight for him. His knights follow, cutting a bloody path through the melee. He breaks through the enemy lines, slays Henry's standard-bearer with his own hand, and nearly reaches the usurper himself. For one breathless instant, it seems the king might seize the future by sheer force of will. But betrayal rides faster than valor. The Stanleys, who have waited until the moment when allegiance is worth the most, descend upon him from the flank. Their soldiers crash into Richard's charge like an iron wave, surrounding him on all sides. His horse is struck down. He fights on foot, shouting his defiance. Chronicles say he kills half a dozen men before he falls. One blow cleaves his helmet. Another pierces the base of his skull. Richard III, the last Plantagenet king of England, dies in the mud at Bosworth Field, still swinging his sword, still refusing to flee. His crown, knocked from his head, rolls beneath a thorn bush. When the battle ends, Lord Stanley finds it there, lifts it high, and places it upon Henry Tudor's brow. The white rose is crushed beneath the red. Richard's body is stripped and thrown across a horse, paraded through the streets of Leicester so the people may see the monster is dead. His corpse bears the marks of humiliation, the wounds of victory twisted into symbols of sin. He is buried without ceremony in a friary's shallow grave, forgotten beneath stones that will one day become a parking lot. The dynasty of York ends there, unshriven and unavenged. Its last son lost to mud and memory. Henry Tudor, crowned Henry VII, wastes no time rewriting the story. He orders the destruction of Titulus Regius, erasing the law that branded Edward's children as bastards. He marries Elizabeth of York, fulfilling his promise and uniting the warring roses into one emblem, the Tudor rose. White and red intertwined. But peace born of propaganda is only another war in disguise. Henry fills the chronicles with stories of Richard's cruelty, his deformity, his wickedness. He becomes the hunchbacked murderer, the usurper damned by God, the black soul that England was cleansed of. And the people believe because they want to believe, because the truth is too painful to face that every king, whether York or Tudor, ruled by the same creed: power first, mercy later, truth never. The fields of Bosworth grow green again, and England moves on. Yet somewhere beneath the soil, beneath centuries of lies, the bones of a man who once believed himself chosen by fate wait to be found. History will curse him, poets will damn him, playwrights will turn him into a villain. But the truth, the real truth, lies buried with him. And in that truth, the ghost of the white rose still whispers through the wind, a reminder that every crown ever taken by blood will one day be lost to it. The centuries pass, and the story of the white rose fades from the living memory of England, but it never truly dies. Time buries the kings and the killers, the oaths and the betrayals, beneath layers of soil and silence. Yet the earth remembers what men try to forget. In the years after Bosworth, Henry VII builds his new dynasty upon the bones of the old, marrying Elizabeth of York to seal the wound he created. The Tudor rose blooms half white, half red, a symbol of unity and peace, though everyone knows it is peace bought with blood. England bows before the new order, weary of war, eager to believe that the past can be rewritten if only the parchment is thick enough. But ghosts do not bend to royal decree. They linger, waiting for the world to listen again. Henry's chroniclers are the first to take up the quill, their ink dark with flattery and fear. They transform Richard III into a monster, his shoulders hunched, his heart black, his hands dripping with the blood of the innocents he silenced. The tale spreads across Europe, polished and reshaped until it becomes legend. The tyrant king slain by divine justice, the usurper struck down so England might heal. Century later, a playwright named William Shakespeare gives that legend a voice that will echo through the ages. He turns the last Plantagenet into a villain for eternity, a man who would trade his soul for a crown, who stumbles through history, crying for a horse as the world abandons him. The audiences cheer, the actors bow, and the truth quiet, uncertain. Human is forgotten once more beneath the roar of the stage. For 500 years, Richard's name is cursed, his grave is lost, his lineage erased, his story reduced to caricature. Scholars argue over the princes in the tower, over whether he killed them or whether history itself committed the murder in his place. Some call him tyrant, others martyr. Most simply call him guilty, because it is easier that way. England prefers its monsters clear, and its heroes untarnished, and no ghost fits comfortably between. The Tudors ensure that every portrait of him bears a twisted spine and a malicious stare, as though evil could be painted onto flesh. The white rose is banished from every crest, every seal, every banner. Even its memory becomes treason. Yet time, patient as stone, waits for truth to breathe again. The centuries march forward, the Tudors die. The Stuarts rise and fall. Empires bloom and crumble. Wars, thunder, and fade. Beneath it all, Richard's bones sleep quietly in Leicester, hidden under the foundations of a monastery that itself will vanish beneath the modern world. Streets are built above his grave. Carriages rattle over it. And later, engines hum and parking lines are painted where once a king was laid in dirt. No one knows. No one remembers. And yet, something beneath the asphalt seems to hold its breath. It is not until the 21st century, more than 500 years after the battle that ended him, that the earth finally releases what it has kept. In the year 2012, archaeologists from the University of Leicester begin a small excavation beneath a nondescript parking lot. They expect little more than the remnants of an old friary. What they find stops time. The first trowel uncovers bones curved strangely, a spine twisted in a sharp S, a skull bearing wounds deep and deliberate. Within days, whispers spread like wildfire. They have found the last Plantagenet. DNA tests confirm it months later. Matching the remains to distant descendants of Richard's sister, the news explodes across the world. The monster of Shakespeare, the murderer of legend, has a body again. For a moment, England holds its breath. Television cameras descend on Leicester. Historians argue on screens, and the world stares into the hollow sockets of a skull that once wore a crown. The discovery rekindles questions. Long thought buried, was he truly a tyrant? Or a man crushed by the weight of a poisoned legacy? Was the story of his cruelty crafted by victors who needed their triumph sanctified? In the soft light of the lab, the bones do not look evil. They look human, fragile, scarred, mortal. The scientists note the wounds, a blade through the base of the skull, a puncture near the ribs, cuts across the jaw and cheek. Death was brutal, but not monstrous. There is no mark of villainy here, only the echo of a battlefield and the silence that followed. In March of 2015, after centuries of anonymity, Richard III is given a king's burial at last. His coffin, carved from English oak and draped in a cloth bearing his emblem, is carried through the streets of Leicester by soldiers in solemn procession. Crowds gather along the roads, thousands of faces illuminated by candlelight, their cheers hushed, their reverence genuine. Some carry white roses, others red, most both symbols reconciled at last. The coffin enters Leicester Cathedral, the air thick with incense and the sound of choirs, and is laid to rest beneath a stone, engraved simply with his name. After 5 centuries, the last Yorkist king has come home. But even now, the debate does not end. Some call his reburial an act of justice, others a pageant of irony. The historians quarrel again over the boys in the tower, or over the ghosts that still haunt the record. The world that unearths him is no less divided than the one that killed him. Yet for the first time, there is no crown, no politics, no need for one truth to erase another. There is only the quiet dignity of the grave, and the reminder that history is not written in ink or victory, but in bones. As the cathedral lights dim, as the last hymn fades into silence, it feels as though the war that began with Richard of York in the 15th century has finally ended. The red rose and the white no longer bleed into one another. They rest side by side, petals folded, roots entwined. The dynasty that once tore England apart has at last found peace, not in triumph, but in remembrance. And somewhere beyond the reach of candlelight, the ghosts of the White Rose linger. Edward IV with his golden laughter, George drowning in the wine of his sins, the lost princes whispering in the dark, and Richard standing among them, his head unbowed. They are not villains now, nor heroes. They are only echoes of a kingdom that learned too late that every crown is made of thorns, every victory sown with sorrow, and every legend built upon the silence of the dead. The stones of Leicester hold that silence still, humming softly beneath the feet of those who pass above. The parking lot is gone, the friary rebuilt in memory, the grave sealed forever. Yet in the wind that sweeps through the cathedral courtyard, one might almost hear it, the faint rustle of petals, the sigh of a ghost at peace. The wars are over, the roses have fallen, and the story, at last, can sleep.